already said, I was pretty excited, but it's lovely to see so many nice people today. And thank you to Cass in the beginning and to Michelle, Lucas, and Libby for organizing the whole series. Yeah, so let's get started. And I want to start with, oh no, it would be nice if the presentation is working here, with a quote from Arpod, which has been accompanying me since my first years in social psychology. And I want to highlight especially the last sentence here. The case is not so simple, because that will be the lead theme in the first part of my talk, where I want to present some findings about positive and negative intergroup contact. And I will continue by introducing how we are trying to approach these challenges from a theoretical perspective. And following that, I will present how we are trying to address these issues by using video games as a research methods. After presenting some of our ongoing work using video games, I want to finish with a glance on the projects to come within the next month, and then I'm really looking forward to the discussion with you guys. So if I say we, I mean me and my amazing PhD student, Jill. We already saw you out there, and also all the larger team members of amazing colleagues from different universities and in Europe supporting us with this project. So thank you everyone who's also here today and supporting us with this work. So let's get started with some findings from the realm of research in positive and negative intergroup contact. And to understand where my research started, I was employed on a research project which examined how positive and negative contact influence prejudice. And even more interestingly, for me personally, whether, when, and how positive and negative intergroup contact interact. I really thought quite some time about what could be interesting for this audience today of contact research. You're all experts, more or less. You're all. Okay. And I decided instead of focusing on these main research questions, like presented here, I want to go into what in our papers is usually seen as the rather boring part. And I want to highlight some findings from the basic descriptives and some byproducts of some of our empirical works, findings which are, of course, reported in our papers, but might sometimes not even make it beyond a small sentence in the discussions. Still, I find them very interesting, and I was hoping they could inspire the discussion in this group. So let's get started with the first assumption, and that is, or the first finding, positive contact is more frequent than negative contact. This should actually not be a surprise, and it actually aligns well with findings from social environments overall. For example, see the work from Unkelbach and Alves group. And this actually holds true even in highly conflictual settings. We did research, for example, in Israel, where we find more positive than negative contact, notably before the ongoing violence, and even for highly vulnerable groups. But what I wanted to share with you today, that the difference between positive and negative also depends on how you ask for negative contact. For example, and that's just for some empirical illustration, in the survey data, if we ask for how often do you have positive negative contact in general, positive is reported 3.5 times more often than negative contact. And in diary data within the same context, if you ask how often did you have contact with white, Asian, British today, and of course this is limited for a time period, for example for 13 days here, positive is reported 6.8 times more often than negative contact. While this is logical to the degree that negative contact is scarce, and if you include a shorter time period, people report less contact. I still believe it's really important to keep that in mind. So if you frame, how you frame and how often you ask your questions will influence these differences in the frequency. So this would be a very typical pattern. And I said we also found this with highly vulnerable groups. And this is from people from Romania and Bulgaria in Hagen, so the city that our university is in. And most of them are identifying as Romani people. And what you can see is you find they have positive contact, most of them several times a week. Yeah, so no surprise so far, but it is important to keep in mind that this is a really highly vulnerable group. Cass already pointed to we're having some cooperations with the city of Hagen, and the city of Hagen actually employs people from these groups to be able to reach out to them with social work, etc. Because most of them don't speak any German. They've just newly arrived in Germany, and they have often have no to very little education. So it's really a highly vulnerable group, and they face very large discrimination, structural discrimination, but also open prejudice, very low levels of trust from the majority. And now if we look at the majority data from the same rather smallish context here, we see the picture turned. And if you see, so people report almost never having any positive contact with that group. And if you look at the mean values in the down corner, you can see that the mean of negative contact is even higher than the mean of positive contact. And very interesting, if you screen through the literature of positive and negative contact, you will find, or at least my latest screening of that showed that actually majority contact with Romani people is one of the only contacts, but contact with police officers, which might be a bit different, right? Where actually a negative contact is reported more often than positive contact. I can't tell you what drives these results, but I think that it's crucial to keep in mind that there are really high levels of prejudice and real low status in the societies. And it might also be that you don't identify Romani people as Romani people if you have positive contact. Yeah, so no answer, but I still found it interesting enough to share it here and to think about it. Another insight, if you look at the frequencies of positive and negative contact, is presented here. The amazing Olivia Spiegler, I believe she might not be here today because she's sick, is currently running a random intercept latent transitions analysis. And this is only a first preliminary glance at the data with the latent profiles. But I want to highlight two classes here. So the first class, class 1, has low positive and very, very low negative contact. You can see they almost have no positive or negative contact. And the third class has high positive but low negative contact. So if we are talking about positive and negative contact in survey data, there actually might be about 50% of our samples who don't have any negative contact at all. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind if we're thinking about the simple models comparing effects or even the moderations. And I suspect that these groups might be very interesting to look at in kind of trying to actually form their expectations towards contact in the future. So if negative contact comes up, how am I going to deal with that? And they might be differentially influenced by news or social media. So just another interesting finding, which I thought we should keep in mind if we talk about intergroup contact. So, and let's move from frequencies to another difference between positive and negative intergroup contact. Positive contact is more stable than negative contact. And as you've seen in the first talk of this series by Therese Fries, we have several projects here in Hagen where we are working with longitudinal data. And throughout our longitudinal data sets, and even in the large reanalysis project, we find very low stability of negative intergroup contact and very low retest reliability. I believe it's much better illustrated with these nice network graphs. And large shout out to Chloe. I saw you, you're here. You very patiently supported me to get these graphs running. And this is also it's relying on data that Chloe used for her thesis in several papers. But Chloe, I believe you often focus on friend networks. This here is a positive contact network. You can see the squares are, I believe, boys, or maybe it's the girls. So the squares are one gender, and the triangles are the other that we assessed in the questionnaire. And you can see there's a large segregation between boys and girls. These are teenagers. This is what happens. And then I'm sorry for the choice of color, but I hope everyone can recognize the red and the blue. So the red is the majority here and blue is the minority. And let's see how such a network of positive contact evolves over time. And if you try to focus on, for example, two ties between them, you can see most of the ties will stay rather connected over time. There's some movement in the network, so some ties are new, some ties are dropped, but overall, this is rather stable. And if you say, well, I didn't see anything here, you will recognize the difference. And this is the network of negative contact over time. You can already see that this is much less negative contact going on, and there's much less ties. So all of these kids basically here being in this moon-like shape, most of them don't have any negative ties coming in or going out. And if you watch that over time, you can see there's a lot of change going on there. Almost none of the connections of negative contact is staying stable over time. And this change is also reflected in the network measures we see here. You saw ties are scarce in negative contact. Reciprocity is low, which is interesting. So if you report that you have negative contact with a certain person, this person not necessarily reports back on you being a negative contact partner. And then longitudinally, negative networks are unstable. So while in positive contact, we are actually talking about something probably like relationships more or less, negative contact is something that is not stable over time. You don't have negative contact with the same person over time. So that was on the stability. And the next finding, I'm going to keep that short, is that positive contact is more positive than negative contact is negative. That is said, this is only if you're using very normal survey data. Yeah, so we're not focusing, that was even true in the context of Israel. So bear with me, but this is not around like a terrorist attack or something like that. Yeah. And we're talking averages here, but still we find that on average, positivity is higher in the realm of positive contact than negativity is in negative contact. Again, bringing it back to social environments overall, this is quite a healthy finding. But in the 2024 paper, we also tried some experiments trying to manipulate intensity, and we could show that increasing intensity differentially affects the effect of positive and negative contact. So if you're having this variable which is basically confounding your frequencies of positive and negative contact in the background, you might get into trouble if you're simply trying to compare the main effects. And don't get me wrong, we've done that several times. Yeah, it's just interesting. And then another thing which we found in diary data on positive and negative contact, which is also related to intensity. These are the results, answer categories for which type or which kind of negative contact did you experience today? And actually, in the realm of positive contact, participants are very capable of following the instructions. Please only report direct contact. Yeah. So we didn't have any indirect contact in the data of positive contact, but recoilingly, so this is the published data, but we have further data. in the realm of negative contact, participants seem to be tempted to report very small things. And for example, the unreciprocated communication. So that's something like I went out the door and greeted my neighbor and they didn't greet back. And that is all already experienced as something really negative, or not really, but as negative. And they also report observed negative contact in the direct negative measure. So just to keep that in mind, things that may more objectively look like something of low negativity might like get counted into the frequency of negative contact overall. If we ask the questions like we usually do, and we did that in the past, for example, if you're lucky, you get some funding, you can actually pay a person to call someone at night and ask them how often do you have positive contact with red people in general, and how often do you have negative contact with red people in general. So far, this seems like a really easy question, right? But this person, just imagine they had a really full work day. They may even have care duties around juggling around kids or friends or parents. And they are sitting at home and maybe they're wondering about what should I eat today? And oh, with all the inflation and global politics going on, so their head might be somewhere else. And they might have to think back about a day which is actually full of sequential contact throughout the day. Yeah, so they might have met a person at the bus stop or while riding the bus, and they might have a very lovely colleague at work, which today was really tired, and maybe so they had a small argument about something. So the question is rather complex, and I would suggest that there might be more to intergroup contact than overall ratings of balanced experiences. So I believe that acknowledging this is of special importance if we want to examine the interplay of positive and negative intergroup contact. Don't get me wrong, I believe it is important to understand how and under which circumstances, for example, people would report high levels of positive and, for example, high levels of negative contact at the same time, and whether such people would differ in their prejudice from others, for example, people who don't report any contact. Yeah. Yet for me, it's a bit more interesting to understand how sequential experiences play out, to understand how previous experiences and expectations shape how subsequent experiences, for example, if we put people into interventions, influence our attitudes and behaviors. So the challenge was to find a setting in which we can at least control some of the chaos. And what we did in the 2021 paper is try to break intergroup contact down to intergroup interactions. And we used a behavior game for that. You're all psychologists. I'm not going to go into the details of a behavior game here, but the interesting thing here is that we would get so up to 17 rounds of in and out group expectations and actual behaviors towards an always new outgroup member. Yeah, so you wouldn't play twice, and you could then run dynamic structural equation models because you have that many repeated interactions, and you could actually test whether the history that builds up throughout these interactions would affect subsequent contact effects. And as I'm presenting it here, I'm thinking it's important because we actually do find that the history matters, that the previous experiences shape how subsequent experiences will affect intergroup expectations. Yet, if you know behavior games, you would also know that behavior games are really artificial. And while I believe it gives us a good start at how we control at least some of the chaos, we were still trying to find a way to achieve higher ecological validity, or as Blaskowitz named it, mundane realism. So now that will be the part where we can start with the video games, but I believe it's important to take one step back and to explicitly state some of the things in theory, which I have assumed in the first part. So first, we want to acknowledge that in everyday life, intergroup contact is actually breaking down into single intergroup interactions, yeah? And all of these interactions might be positive or negative, we don't know. We do know that positive is a bit more frequent most of the times, probably. So this is the first part. We then assume that positive and negative intergroup contact will build up somehow. We don't exactly know how over time. So I would assume that positive and negative intergroup contact, how we measure it in our surveys, is more or less like a self-representation of me being a person which actually has a lot of positive or a lot of negative intergroup contact. And I think we can profit from looking at other disciplines within psychology here, because self-reports have been framed as kind of, I like the wording they are choosing here, a press release. Yeah. So if a person, an interviewer, calls you at night while you're sitting at home thinking about food, inflation, and politics, you might not actually recall, because that is a really difficult task, all the interactions exactly like you had them during the last half year or something, but you might rather report a press release version of what you want to see, and that might more strongly be connected to biases. And also looking at personality research, if you there's interesting research, very rather new research, combining experience sampling methods with questionnaires, and there the description of states. So this approaches the trait self-reports with a time span after, like if people have to recall their state over larger time spans than half an hour. Yeah. So the accuracy of the actual experiences might decrease and approach more the positive, or no, the self-representation we have already after about half an hour. You might argue that intergroup interactions might be a bit stronger than my state of how I feel, but still, I just thought that would be interesting to share. And then, of course, if we're talking about which biases might affect our self-reports, one correlation that we do know is always there with our positive and intergroup contact, positive and negative contact measures, is intergroup attitudes, and to a certain degree our intergroup behaviors. And I'm not saying that I don't believe that positive and intergroup contact also affects intergroup attitudes, but I just want us to keep that in mind. And to make it a bit more complicated, we're also assuming that every intergroup interaction will evoke an immediate emotional reaction, not only emotional, but also attitudinal and behavioral within the situation. And while on the one hand, our intergroup attitudes and self-portrait of our behavior will feed back into these immediate reactions, they will also feed back into our self-concept of intergroup attitudes. So that's the theoretical framework, and I could make it even more complicated, but I'll stop here and I'll just highlight some things which are missing and which have been highlighted in previous literature. So if you haven't read that, read the PageGood paper, please. But these are just some things. You will probably think of other things which are still missing. But yeah, so timescales, interacting with the same or different persons, previous informations, stuff like that. But I believe that, so it is even more complicated, but we can start breaking it down systematically, and that will be important if we try to control, manipulate, and understand these challenges. So now, finally, we're going to talk about video games. So video games, and most of you will know that, are very popular. So 40%, it's estimated 40% of the world population are playing video games, and even more so in industrialized countries. Actually, having my teenage kids at home, I was quite surprised that it's only 72% of US teenagers which are playing video games. And if you're saying, yeah, well, that's important for the teenagers, I could argue, well, but teenagers are really important. But even within the group of 45 years and older, they outnumber the 2 to 24-year-olds and are the fastest growing consumer base. I mean, they also have more money than the younger generation, so that might play in here. Today, and you will know that video games are much more than early logic puzzles, even so I still love these early logic puzzles. And they elicit not only enjoyment of the game, but also a wider range of emotions. And that's where it gets really exciting for me. Also, even a sense of relatedness. And social motivations, for example, helping and collaboration, are seen as one of the core motivations to play video games. And even interactions with non-player characters, so with the avatars, and are sufficient to elicit perceived relations. I found the qualitative study here really impressing among frequent players who really talked about deep concern, emotional attachment, almost love-like feelings from everything from admiration to deep concern for non-player characters. And it has been suggested that, for example, helping behavior can build these relationships. You will very often in video games meet a person that is portrayed as searching help, and you will go on the task to, I don't know, find their lost treasure and bring it back to them or something. Yeah. And also it has been shown that NPCs can actually affect heart rate and electrodermal activity. So more and more researchers, and that's not surprising, are using video games. For example, Matilde made a very concise review, which is now from 2021. Also, some studies missing, of course. But in that review, there were 15 studies which examined interactions with an NPC or an avatar, which will be the foundation of the research I'm presenting in a few slides. It has to be highlighted, though, that all of the studies in the review were actually using head-mounted displays, and you can see that one on my oldest kid. But for our research, we are actually using video games, and in comparison, video games, while they produce less presence in the scene, they have a comparable user experience. They do not have differences or cause differences in arousal or evaluation of the game, and even provide a lower cognitive load, increased memory of items in the game, and have less side effects like motion sickness. And of course, some of the upsides not stated here is that actually you can play video games everywhere. Yeah, we have a server-based version of our experiment, so people can play it from their home computers. They could, in principle, play it from their phones. Okay, so that, of course, is a bit cheaper than buying an experimental setup. So how can we use video games to examine this chaos? And before we want to, while I imply that we can, we went back to the very basics. And the first setup for our experiment in video games was like this. We started with entering a player name, scene, and then I will tell you about the story more if you haven't heard it yet. But next they would have like an introduction to the task. And they would either be assigned to positive or negative contact, where they would have 6 interactions. And I know this is super boring if I just presented that very exciting thing here, and then I'm saying, well, they all have positive or negative. But it was really important for us. We pre-tested all of these interactions extensively before we even put them in the video game, and we really wanted to establish that positive and negative are working like they are supposed to do before continuing. So, and then they would have a final scene and a very traditional questionnaire at the end. So the storyline that we chose is that we asked our participants to imagine that they fell asleep and woke up in the future. And now they need to get up and interact with the people around them to find time crystals to bring them back to their own time. Yeah. And I will shortly show you the screenplay, and of course, well, because we played it in our with the German sample, this is now all in German. You can move around the building with the basic computer movement. You will enter a room, you will ask, please go to the desk and start interacting with the person. You can pick your question. Well, that was a bit fast, and you will receive your answer. So this is the basic setup from the experiments, from the basic start experiments, and we ran these studies in the lab to get a real impression about how people are actually dealing with that setting. Then we ran a server-based version, and we also started doing that stuff in virtual reality, also because it's much easier to receive funding for virtual reality than for the settings. And the sample is now at, I think, 42 or something. Jill might know better. So the basic results, and I already said it's rather boring, but we could, this is now warmth, so measured in the post questionnaire. We asked a lot of questions about would you expect the whole groups of aliens from whom you've met several now to be? And you can see in the negative condition, the group would be estimated to be less positive than in the positive condition. So this is obviously just the groundwork, and we found similar results for other measures like future contact attention, a bit more exciting stuff. So future steps. So this is very recent work. So most of it is done. Some of it is in the process of being analyzed. First of all, we did what is now missing in the results, but it's probably the most exciting part, is the random sequence of valenced interaction. So we've now started to implement like participants would enter the scene and then they would receive a random positive and negative contact, and we could actually start studying the effects of sequence within this setting. So that is implemented, and we run first studies, and then we started manipulating expectations because and I think Jill will present some of that at the Fachgruppentagung in Bochum. For everyone who will be there, you can see those pictures. They were basically like implemented in like a news screen that participants read before entering the scene, and they would either talk about how amazing the cooperation is going between humans and aliens, or how aliens and humans would get into conflict in different scenarios before entering the scene. And small spoiler there, we do find effects of expectations on subsequent positive and negative contact.
Sarina, sorry, can you remind us about the operationalization of contact valence? It's like in the JPSP paper, so it's based on feedback from the contact partner.
It is like in this setting, it is the answer of the alien, basically. So you enter the office, you would ask a question, and then you would either receive a positive or a negative reply.
Okay, thanks. Yeah,
of course. So what we're doing this month is we're including behavior into the game, because this is one of the exciting opportunities which arise with video games and virtual reality. So I think we're almost finished programming a distance measure, so we will start measuring at which point participants stop when coming into the room to actually ask the question to their interaction partner. And we're just about to start pre-testing these scales you can see on the right, where you can adapt your question to the alien, which is kind of a behavior measure, because you would enter a new room every time, and we are expecting in the negative condition that the participants will start less friendly towards the aliens over time. So that would also be a time to measure it. And then the exciting things to share here is that we received funding, and that will be Jill's PhD project to extend the paradigm to be used for larger time frames. So we will build basically a small city, and we will force students to log in every day over a larger time period, and then have a small task like go to the bakery and buy some bread or something. And they will have interactions there, and then we can actually have a larger time scale using that paradigm. And what's also funded already is, the most prominent critique is why are you working with aliens? We are working with these because we believe it's really important to differentiate between known and unknown groups and to have an actual look at expectations. But of course, it's interesting whether this also works with real groups. So we're extending the paradigm with avatars from real group. And then yes, we'll be complementing these video games with experience sampling and diary data in different settings. So that is funded. But and then even more exciting, maybe, we're currently applying for funding, and feel free to contact me if you want to get in touch to one of these projects and get involved. With Olivia, I'm applying for a multicultural international database of evaluated avatars. So right now we're more or less always relying on these avatars which are already there, and people are not thoroughly evaluating them. There's one paper in the US context with very few evaluated avatars, but the idea is to actually provide a database so every one of you in the future who's interested can just go to that toolbox and drag and drop the avatar into their game, and then see, oh, that was evaluated, I don't know, in the UK, and it was estimated to be very attractive and very friendly, Asian looking, probably female person, something like that. So, and then we're with the computer scientists in Hagen, we're working on using large language models for bots to animate our interactions, because as you've seen in the short video clip, the interactions now are really short and maybe rather boring, but with large language models, and especially they now have a private setup service, so we can actually tell them to make a very unfriendly bot, which is hard without the own server. And then with many of you who are here today, we are trying to prepare Marie Sklodowska-Curie network, understanding improving intergroup relations using virtual reality. There will be a workshop on that in fall. We haven't set the dates yet, but I will send out the information as soon as we have the dates and final funding confirmed. So look out for that. Last slide. First thing, I believe we can all profit from reconsidering theory and methods, just to not get too used to what we're doing and just go back and think about it. I believe that it can provide important insights. The video games can provide important insights for basic research questions. And especially for our participants, they provide an attractive, immersive, and relatively low-cost research environment. And with the technical advancements, I can tell you, every one of you is able to actually learn the little of programming that is necessary to realize such a thing. And I guess in the future we will see AI programmers that will do the setup for you as soon as you ask them nicely. And I've learned recently, if you ask AI nicely, you get better results. So it's just another call to stay kind. So still, of course, there are a lot of open empirical questions about how these findings transfer to real groups, and so on. My optimistic bet, that would be that with real groups we can at least see an increase in future contact intentions, but it's an open empirical question. And if they do transfer, I believe there are amazing opportunities for interventions. And then the last thing I wanted to say is we have a very nice supportive network working with virtual reality. We're really open also for PhD students who are interested in working with video games, virtual reality. So get in contact if you're interested in joining that group. And this is a large thank you to my team, which we also brought into virtual reality. And thank you to everyone for your attention, and looking forward to the discussion with you today.